What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? It creates exactly what you would expect, a bitter and often petty rivalry between two brother demigods. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, the 12th found son of the Emperor of Mankind and Primarch of the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, hates Rogal Dorn. Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terror, the 7th found son of the Emperor of Mankind and Primarch of the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists, loathes Perturabo. The traitorous Iron Warriors, the masters of siegecraft and fortification, hate the Imperial Fists. The ever-loyal Imperial Fists, the masters of fortification and siegecraft, loathe the Iron Warriors. For 10,000 years, the two legions and their descendants have hunted one another across the galaxy. They have warred since their earliest opportunity, drawn together now by mutual hatred. Systems, planets, forts, and trench lines, these are the endless battlegrounds upon which their ancient grudge is fought again and again. One will claim victory, then the other. One will siege, the other will fortify. One will assault, the other will defend, and so it goes on and on. An endless dance between now distant cousins, with neither side yet securing the ultimate victory that it so desperately craves. As it was in the Horus Heresy, so it continues today. But just how true is all of this to say? Is there really mutual hatred between these legions? Surely such shared passions and interests between like-minded brother Primarchs should have drawn them closer than any others, not tear them apart and drive them to opposing sides in war. So how exactly could such a rivalry even begin? Firstly, yes, almost all of this is true. The two legions do genuinely despise one another, a hatred that has festered and deepened since the days of the Great Crusade, and one that has long since broken through the fourth wall to extend to their supporters throughout the community on both sides, to the entertainment of myself and many others. As to the shared passions and interests of the brother Primarchs in fortification and siegecraft, engineering and architecture, well, similarity encourages understanding, or at least some would claim so. In the case of Rogal Dorn and Perturabo, this sentiment not only fails but shatters under the weight of reality, for rarely could there be said to be two beings on the surface who more resembled each other yet were separated by a greater chasm. Both reserved to the point of taciturn, both unyielding, both sublime artisans of war who prized indomitability and endurance, there was much that would suggest that they should see the world with one set of eyes, that perhaps they should be closer than any others. That bitterest loathing could arise between two such closely matched kin seems incredible, but it was a reality, some say from the first moment of their meeting. And to answer the question as to how such a rivalry between brother Primarchs could begin, and to move past the shallow suggestion or implication that it simply always existed, we should first work to understand the backgrounds and personalities of the Primarchs in question. Perturabo is... how do I put this delicately? Perturabo is special. No, let's say he is complex. Perturabo is a cold, brooding intellect of the highest order, a brilliant strategist and tactician undone by his own ego, driven by an eternal sense of victimhood and a supposedly unfulfilled desire to spend his life building the greatest wonders of architecture and engineering instead of leading transhuman armies on a crusade across the galaxy. Perturabo's fall to chaos, or rather his sworn allegiance to Horus the Arch-Traitor in his rebellion against the Emperor, was driven in large part by his own belief that he was never appreciated, that he was ignored, undervalued, and underestimated. He claims that he and his legion were given the toughest battles, sent to the most brutal war zones to face the most dangerous and determined foes, that he and his sons were used for the most thankless tasks, thrown against the worst of horrors, given the most grueling roles. We are divided, our talents ignored, our might reduced to splitting rock. My father ignores me, my men go unsung, our triumphs are unremembered, my brothers mock me as my men bleed, nobody cares, so claims the Lord of Iron. In such rants we see a great deal of Perturabo's mindset. He complains that he and his legion were given the most thankless tasks and in the same breath describes being sent against the worst horrors and assigned the most difficult of campaigns. To Perturabo, this was proof that he was undervalued and exploited. To others, it could just as easily be seen as evidence that he was trusted with responsibilities that few of his brothers were thought capable of or suited for. This, of course, was pointed out to the Lord of Iron by his own stepsister, Caliphany, shortly before Perturabo strangled her to death. Here is my version of the story. The Emperor of all mankind came here and found a son whom he valued. He recognized that the tedious to you is as necessary a challenge to overcome as the glorious. Seeing these qualities in you, your father set you difficult tasks, not because he saw no value in you, but the exact opposite, because he can trust no one else to get them done. Always you do things the most difficult way and in the most painful manner. You cultivate a martyr's complex, lurching from man to man, holding out your bleeding wrists so that they might see how you hurt yourself. You brood in the shadows when all you want to do is scream, "Look at me!" You are too arrogant to win people over through effort. You expect people to notice you there in the half darkness and point and shout out, there is the great Perturabo. See how he labors without complaint." Perturabo saw every difficult assignment as another slight, every burden as proof of neglect, and every sacrifice of a son butchered in the mud as evidence that he was unappreciated and hard done by. Yet it was Perturabo himself who made things harder, who threw bodies at walls until they broke, who approached war with a bluntness entirely at odds with his own intellect, and who racked up casualties far beyond what the objective required. It is not hard to read this as deliberate, as a way to justify and deepen his own victimhood, to fabricate fresh complaints and grudges to hold on to, or to draw attention to himself in an attempt to make others recognize and sympathize with the hardships he and his legion faced, hardships he himself had no small part in making more difficult. And this stings all the more, knowing that the other Primarchs received their own share of brutal assignments and hard campaigns, each suited to their own abilities in turn, and each executed them without the drama and self-pity that follows the Iron Warriors around like a bad smell. Now to Rogal Dorn. Dorn is, well, he is complex too. He is complex in the sense that he is seen as empty, reserved, straightforward, and blunt, not unlike Perturabo in that regard. But there is a depth to his character that often goes forgotten or ignored, one that only shows itself the closer you look. Rogal Dorn is the Praetorian of terror. Like his brother, Dorn is a brilliant mind, an expert architect, strategist, and tactician. Unlike his brother, Dorn is a stoic soul, and one who values loyalty above all else, loyalty to a fault. He is the son chosen to serve as the ultimate protector of their father, the Emperor of mankind, and the shield of humanity's birthplace. Recalled from the front lines of the Crusade to secure and fortify Terra, to safeguard the Emperor and his great work, Dorn was chosen not for his expertise in fortification and siege work, as many will often claim, but instead for his unquestionable loyalty, his quiet, dogged determination, and most of all, his trustworthiness. As Malkador puts it, would you hand the keys of your fortress to anyone less than utterly trustworthy? It is this aspect of Dorn's nature, I believe, above all others, that led to the common perception of him as stolid and humorless, despite the fact that one of the earliest lines of dialogue uttered by Dorn in Horus Rising is him telling a joke, and as a dull conformist with aggressive humility. But while I wholeheartedly reject the idea of Dorn being either stolid or humorless, it is hard to argue that he isn't blunt, rigid, and often dry. After all, we must always remember that Dorn resisted the temptations of Khorne during the assault on the vengeful spirit by simply boring the blood god half to death through his ability to recite centuries of historical analysis and military strategy. And it was these same qualities, combined with his own strange kind of elevation, whereby he was technically equal to his brothers in rank, yet also set apart from them as the Emperor's chosen bodyguard, that opened chasms between him and his more emotional, aspirational, passionate, or differently minded brothers, like Alpharius for one, who put it quite plainly: "He never lies. I don't trust anyone who only speaks the truth." So, Perturabo is a cold, brooding, jealous soul, where Dorn is a stoic, reserved, and aggressively humble one. Already we can see the fertile soil in which the seeds of rivalry could easily take root. There are many different accounts that touch upon the rivalry between these two, and quite a few of them actively contradict one another. Some, as we have touched on, imply the rivalry existed from the moment they met. Others suggest that it is simply old, dating back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade. Some point to Perturabo's jealousy at Dorn's selection as Praetorian over him, others to Dorn's loathing of Perturabo's wasteful tactics. Others still point to Dorn being praised for victories Perturabo had a hand in, and to Dorn earning further praise for deeds Perturabo sees as trivial next to his own hardships and achievements. One older account in particular points to a victory feast during the Crusade attended by several Primarchs, Horus, Fulgrim, Dorn, and Perturabo among them. There, Fulgrim, the Phoenician, Primarch of the Emperor's Children, asked Dorn whether he believed his defences could hold off and repel an Iron Warrior's assault. Dorn, after some careful thought, answered that a well-manned defense could hold against any assault, a response that sent Perturabo into a rage, unleashing a torrent of vitriol at Dorn, accusations so unfounded that the onlookers were dumbstruck. But to dive deeper and to try to reveal the truth among so much conflicting information, there are some threads we can pull on to get a clearer picture. First, we know that Dorn and Perturabo did not, in fact, hate each other from the moment they met. We know this because, during the Siege of Terra, Perturabo let slip a small confession to then First Captain Abaddon. He tells Abaddon of a trick he relies upon greatly and one he learned long ago from one of his brothers. Can you guess who? As it turns out, long before the heresy, Dorn had bested Perturabo 9 times in a row in what were presumably wargame simulations, test exercises as Perturabo describes them. Unable to understand how his brother kept beating him so totally and consistently, Perturabo swallowed his pride and asked Dorn how he did it. As Perturabo recalls, "We were brothers then. Such interactions were possible." This is quite telling. Whatever came later, there does seem to have been a time when the two shared a genuine brotherly relationship, one in which pride and ego could be set aside in favour of learning, mutual respect, and self-improvement. Before jealousy and resentment curdled into rivalry and rivalry into hatred, Perturabo was clearly willing to seek Dorn's advice, and Dorn was willing to give it. For, as Perturabo also adds, he, Dorn, was glad to share a technique with me. Dorn did not mock him for his question, nor did he dismiss him or selfishly guard his advantage. He answered openly and honestly, and was glad to do so. And for those curious about the secret behind Dorn's victories, his advice was pretty simple: step away. Disconnect from the problem for a time, even at its most critical moment, reset. Doing so allows one to clear the mind and focus, to shed the extraneous and the superficial, to contemplate, to reduce the immeasurable complexity down to simple principles. Whatever else can be said about their relationship, moments like this show that the hatred came later, and was not something that existed from the very beginning at least. Okay, so it did not always exist. Great, but this does not help us to answer the question as to how the rivalry eventually formed. The short answer to this question is that it developed gradually over time. I do not think there was any single argument, insult, or defining incident that single-handedly led to the gulf that developed between them. Instead, it was caused by what the Horus Heresy Book 3 Extermination describes as a pattern both of behavior and incidents that quickly and steadily eroded their relationship over time until it became untenable. But exactly what behavior and incidents are being referred to? On behavior, we should go back a bit and address what really is the elephant in the room, their glaring similarities. The two shared many qualities between them, but none, I would say, more so than their stubbornness. They were too much alike. Neither man was one to bend. They were stubborn to the point where pressure only hardened their resolve, like stone and iron in some ways, before both shatter, that is. Once an argument began, which seems to have been a common occurrence, as Dorn makes reference to years of exchanged insults, neither would apologize nor admit fault. Perturabo is always one to cast himself as the victim, and Dorn's commitment to truth-telling left little room for the careful diplomacy required to navigate the situation and soothe any burns inflicted, even if they were accidental. Even when a small concession or a harmless white lie might have ended an argument or dispute, Dorn would not offer it, and Perturabo, I think, would never ask for it or even accept it. Conversation was also never a strength of either Primarch. Both preferred directness and quiet calculation or contemplation over open conversation, creating an environment where grievances, real or fabricated, are left to fester rather than being confronted directly. Dorn would see Perturabo's silence as resentment or as attention-seeking, while Perturabo would see Dorn's outward humility and blunt honesty as thinly veiled arrogance and insult. Then there is the matter of varied approach, for while the two shared many similarities, including many of the same principles when it came to the art of war, the way they put those principles into practice differed greatly. While both Rogal Dorn and Perturabo often favoured siegecraft in war, they often differed in its execution. While both were pragmatic, Perturabo often displayed a brutal directness to waging war, applying overwhelming force or sustaining horrific casualties. While Dorn would never balk at paying such a price for victory, he rarely accepted large numbers of casualties except through necessity. Dorn was an undoubted idealist above all else, Perturabo a pragmatist first and foremost. Moving from broad patterns of behaviour and onto the actual incidents that contributed to the eventual erosion of their relationship, there are many to cover. There is Dorn's early success in carving out, much like Guilliman, a small interstellar empire before being rediscovered by the Emperor. A privilege Perturabo never enjoyed, having never left his world of Olympia before his reunion with his father. Given his character, it's hard to imagine Perturabo wasn't at least somewhat jealous of that achievement. There was the victory feast mentioned earlier, likely just one of many similar exchanges that played out over the decades. There was also a particular incident that took place in the aftermath of the Iraqi Spiral campaign, a system-wide compliance action that involved the Dark Angels, White Scars, Imperial Fists, and Iron Warriors. By all accounts, this campaign was a hard and bloody one, and as such, great works of art and heroic verse were composed in the wake of the victory, celebrating the courage of the Imperial Fists, the Dark Angels, and the White Scars, but nowhere in the reams of poetry or artwork were the grim labours of the Iron Warriors judged worthy of note. But there was one art piece from this campaign that did showcase the Iron Warriors' involvement, the very piece you see on screen now. The Glory of the Fallen, as it's known, a piece put together by the remembrancer Kellen Roger. Have a close look. Press your nose up against the screen. Closer. Closer. Perfect. Do you see anything wrong with this artwork? Or rather, should I say, do you see anything that might leave the Lord of Iron displeased? I'll tell you what I see. I see Iron Warriors, dead, tired, or kneeling in the mud, surrounded by the ruination of a costly engagement. I see an Iron Warrior apothecary set about the task of tending to the fallen, preparing to harvest the progenoid gland of a slain brother, while around him yet more brothers watch in silence, likely thinking on the price of unity, wondering whose turn it will be next on whatever godforsaken battlefield they bleed on after this one. And what is that flying in the breeze above them, planted proudly upon the walls of the defeated enemy? The banner of the Imperial Fists. It's said that Perturabo went to the trouble of procuring the piece himself, only to set it on fire in front of Roger, much to the painter's horror, explaining that if my sons are not to be honoured properly, then they will not be part of a record that glorifies another. It is also said that Dorn later offered the artist a handsome commission to repaint the piece, to which Roger politely declined. It's easy to see how incidents like this fed into the increasingly common Iron Warriors' view of the Imperial Fists as arrogant pretenders to honours and reputations they had bought with lies, despite the Imperial Fists having played no part in orchestrating such incidents themselves. There was also, of course, again, the incident of Dorn's selection as Praetorian of Terror over Perturabo, an eventuality that may well have been the tipping point, one that left Perturabo unable to see his brother as anything but a rival to be envied and eventually bested. This sentiment would only have deepened with time, as the common talk of the strength of Dorn's defences in the Sol system and throughout the Emperor's Palace on Terra reached Perturabo's ears, the kind of praise that would have enraged him to the extreme, as undoubtedly Perturabo believed he could have done a better job if given the chance. Perturabo was ever jealous of the esteem in which Rogal Dorn was held, seeing conceit and arrogance where others saw nobility. The last specific incident I want to cover, and I've intentionally saved this one for last given both the questionable nature of the claim and the reliability of its source, is the supposed Iron Warriors' belief that Dorn and the Imperial Fists somehow turned Olympia, homeworld of Perturabo and his legion, against the Iron Warriors during the Crusade with the intent to leave the legion disgraced and discarded after they had served their purpose. This claim is only mentioned offhandedly in the first Index Astartes, a source that seems riddled with bias for each legion in turn, despite how detailed and informative its content otherwise is. Regardless though, I thought I would still mention this as, well, it seems worth mentioning, even if it is baseless in reality. Taken together, this combination of both Primarch's personalities, their similarities and differences, the behaviours and the incidents we've covered, compounding over decades, paint a clear enough picture of how the two became so distant, so diametrically opposed as to become rivals and eventually hated enemies. It was a stubborn clash of perspectives and approaches to the same challenge. It was an ongoing battle of opinions, interpretations, and beliefs. It was the elevation of one in ways the other could never accept. It was years of exchanged insults. It was decades of endless comparison. It was positivity versus negativity. It was idealism versus pragmatism. It was stoicism versus neuroticism. It was, quite possibly, rivalry by design. For competition had always been a motivating force amongst the Primarch brothers. It had been encouraged as a factor to drive them on to greater and yet greater accomplishments. And I will leave you with that thought. Thanks for watching. Dystopian Chimp, out.